My mom said, "You should quit your new job so your brother can take your position." I smiled and replied, "He can have it, but he'll have to explain why he lost his own job first." I had been at my new job for 11 days when my mother called me on a Tuesday evening and told me I needed to resign so my brother could have my position. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a grocery receipt, a half-finished sandwich, and my laptop open because I had a training module due before midnight. I actually thought I had misunderstood her. My mother had a habit of making requests sound like decisions that had already been made. When I was younger, I usually went along with them because arguing with her took more energy than whatever I was being asked to give up. This time was different. I had spent almost 4 months looking for the job I had just started. I had been laid off from my previous company during a restructuring, and although I received unemployment for a while, it barely covered my mortgage, utilities, groceries, and car insurance. I had applied to dozens of positions. I had rewritten my resume so many times that I could practically recite every bullet point from memory. The job I finally got was not my dream job, but it was stable, paid better than my previous position, included health insurance, offered a retirement plan with a company match, and gave me a path toward a management position. More importantly, I had earned it myself. Nobody in my family had referred me. Nobody had put in a good word. Nobody had handed me anything. So when my mother explained that my brother needed my position more than I did, I was honestly confused. She said that my brother had been having a difficult time since losing his job, and that my new employer was exactly the kind of company where he could succeed. She also said that because I had already proven I could find another job, I should be willing to step aside. I remember staring at my kitchen wall while she talked. I had no idea what to say. Then she explained that my brother had apparently been considered for the same opening before I was hired. That was the first thing that bothered me. I had never heard that from him. I had never heard that from my mother. I had never heard that from anyone. I asked how my brother could have been considered for a position that I had applied for through a public posting. My mother said there had been some confusion and that the company had originally wanted him. That made even less sense. I told her that if he wanted to apply, he was welcome to apply. She said that was not what she meant. She wanted me to quit so the company could hire him. I laughed because I honestly thought she was joking. She was not. She became irritated that I was laughing. I tried explaining that I could not simply resign from a job because another adult wanted it. She reminded me that family was supposed to help family. I reminded her that I had a mortgage. That did not seem to matter. She said I was being selfish. That word had been used against me before. Usually it appeared whenever I refused to give my brother something that belonged to me. When we were kids, selfish meant I would not let him use my new game console until I had finished playing. In high school, selfish meant I would not let him borrow my car for an entire weekend because I needed it for work. As adults, selfish apparently meant refusing to give up a job I had worked hard to get. I told her I was not quitting. She became quiet for a few seconds. Then she said that I would regret making things difficult for my brother. I told her I was sorry he was struggling. I meant that. I knew losing a job could mess with a person's confidence and finances, but I was not going to voluntarily become unemployed so he could feel better. That was when I made the mistake that later became one of the most important things I did. I smiled to myself and told her that he could have the job if he could explain why he had lost his own job first. I said it partly because I was annoyed. I had no idea at the time how important that sentence would become. My mother ended the call shortly afterward. I finished my training module. Then I went to bed. For about 3 hours, I convinced myself the entire thing was ridiculous enough that it would disappear. It did not. The next morning, my brother sent me a message asking why I was trying to ruin his life. I stared at my phone for a long time. I had not spoken to him about the job. I had not told him what our mother and I discussed. That meant my mother had immediately told him. I responded that I was not trying to ruin his life and that I was simply not quitting my job. He replied that I knew exactly what I was doing. I asked him what he thought I was doing. He did not answer directly. Instead, he said that our mother had explained everything and that I needed to stop acting like I was better than him. That was when I realized something was happening inside my family that I did not fully understand. I had always known my mother favored my brother. It was not a secret. My brother was 3 years younger than me, and growing up he was the one everyone worried about. If he struggled in school, my parents called the teacher. If I struggled, I was told to work harder. If he needed money, somebody usually found it. If I needed money, I was told to budget better. I had spent years telling myself that this was normal sibling inequality. I thought maybe every family had one child who needed more help. What I did not understand was how much that pattern had continued into adulthood. My brother had moved out when he was 23, but he had returned home several times since then. He had changed jobs frequently. He had tried starting a small business that lasted less than a year. He had accumulated credit card debt. He had once borrowed money from me to make a car payment and never mentioned the money again. I eventually stopped asking for it because I did not want another argument. That was one of my mistakes. I confused avoiding conflict with being generous. They are not the same thing. For the next week, things were strangely quiet. My mother stopped calling me. My brother stopped responding to my messages. At work, I tried to focus on learning my responsibilities. I was still new enough that every day involved unfamiliar software, meetings, procedures, and names. I was also trying to prove that hiring me had been the right decision. My manager had made it clear during my first week that the company had hired me because they needed someone who could eventually take ownership of a complicated account system. The position was not entry-level. There was training, but I was expected to become independent fairly quickly. I had no reason to believe my job was in danger. Then on a Friday afternoon, I received an email from a coworker I barely knew. She asked if I had previously worked with my brother. I thought maybe she had confused our names. I told her no. She replied that she had seen his name attached to an old internal application. That made my stomach drop. I asked what she meant. She said she probably should not have mentioned it. Then she stopped responding. I did not push her. I had no idea what information she had seen, and I did not want to involve coworkers in my family problem. Instead, I went home and searched my brother's name online. I found his professional profile. There was nothing unusual. He listed his previous employer and several skills that were relevant to my new position. Then I noticed something strange. He had updated his profile 2 weeks before I started my job. The update said he was actively seeking a new opportunity in the exact field I had just entered. That by itself meant nothing. Plenty of people look for jobs, but I started thinking about what my mother had said. She had claimed my brother had originally been considered for my position. I wondered whether he had actually applied. The following Monday, I asked my manager a carefully worded question. I did not mention my mother. I did not mention my brother. I simply asked whether there had been other candidates for my position before I was hired. My manager said there had been several. That was normal. I asked whether one of those candidates had withdrawn. She said no. Then she looked at me for a moment and asked why I wanted to know. I told her that a family member had made an odd comment about the hiring process. I did not give her details. My manager told me that hiring decisions were based on qualifications, and that she had no reason to believe anything unusual had happened. I thanked her and went back to work. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me more suspicious. If my brother had never been a candidate, why had my mother told me that the company had wanted him? I did not have an answer. Then another piece of information appeared. It came from my aunt. She called me on Sunday morning while I was doing laundry. She asked whether my brother had gotten the position. I almost dropped the laundry basket. I asked what position she meant. She said the job I had taken. I asked how she knew about it. She said my mother had told the family that I had gotten in the way of my brother's opportunity. I stood there in my laundry room holding a wet towel. My aunt explained that everyone believed my brother had been promised the position. That was completely different from what I had understood. I told her I had never been told that. She said she did not know the details and did not want to get involved. I told her I did not want her involved either. I just wanted to know what was happening. She apologized and said she had assumed I knew. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and tried to reconstruct the timeline. My brother lost his job. I applied for a new job. I interviewed. I was hired. My mother then demanded that I quit so my brother could take it. Somehow my extended family had been told that the position was supposed to belong to him. I still did not know why. The answer came 2 days later. My brother called me. He sounded angry at first. Then he sounded tired. He told me that he had been unemployed for almost 5 months. I already knew that. What I did not know was that he had been fired. I had assumed he had been laid off. That distinction mattered. He said his previous employer had fired him after an investigation involving company records. I asked what kind of records. He said it was complicated. I asked whether it involved money. He became defensive. That was the first moment when I understood why my mother had reacted so strongly when I mentioned his previous job. He told me he had made mistakes. He said other employees had made mistakes too. He said management had singled him out because they did not like him. I did not accuse him of anything. I simply asked what had happened. He said he had been responsible for entering and reviewing customer information. Some records had been changed without authorization. His login credentials had been used for some of those changes. He insisted he had not personally made all the changes. I asked whether he had shared his password. He became silent. Then he admitted that he had given his login information to another employee because they were behind on work. I asked whether he was allowed to do that. He said no. That explained the firing. It also explained why my mother wanted me to quit. If my brother applied for another job in the same field and had to explain why he had been terminated, he might not get hired. My mother had apparently decided that the easiest solution was to give him my job instead. I told my brother I understood why he was scared. I also told him that I was not responsible for fixing his employment history. He said I was making him look like a criminal. I told him I had not told anyone anything. He said our mother already knew. I asked how she knew. He said she had helped him deal with the firing. That was another detail I had never known. My mother had been involved from the beginning. She had helped him talk to his former employer. She had apparently also helped him prepare applications. At some point, she had learned about the company where I worked. I asked my brother whether he had applied there. He said yes. That was the first time he admitted it. He had applied before I did. He said he had not gotten an interview. I asked why. He said the company had contacted him, but the process stopped after they asked about his previous employment. That made everything click. My brother had not lost the job because I had taken it. He had failed to get the job because his previous employment history raised questions. Then I applied. I interviewed. I got hired. My mother had taken those separate events and turned them into a story where I had stolen something from my brother. Once I understood that, I felt less angry and more disappointed. I had spent years wondering why my family treated him like a fragile adult. Now I realized they had created a system where he never had to fully deal with consequences. Someone else always absorbed them. This time, that someone was supposed to be me. The following Friday, my mother came to my house without calling first. I was changing the air filter in my HVAC system when I saw her car pull into my driveway. She walked to the front door carrying a folder. I immediately knew it was not going to be a casual visit. She came inside after I let her in. She put the folder on my kitchen table. She told me that my brother had another opportunity lined up and that I needed to cooperate. I asked what she meant by cooperate. She said she wanted me to submit my resignation. I told her no. She said she had already spoken to someone who could help my brother get hired. I asked who. She would not tell me. I asked whether that person worked at my company. She said it was not important. That answer made me uncomfortable. I told her I was not going to participate in anything that involved misleading my employer. She became upset. She said I was making this about morality when it was really about helping family. I asked whether she expected me to lie about why I was leaving. She said I could simply say I had found something else. I asked whether she expected my brother to disclose his previous termination. She said he would handle it. I asked whether he would tell the truth. She said I was being deliberately difficult. I looked at the folder. I asked what was inside. She told me it was paperwork for my brother. I opened it. It contained a printed resume, a cover letter, and several notes. The resume listed my brother's previous employer. It did not mention that he had been fired. The cover letter described him as someone who had voluntarily left his previous position to pursue new opportunities. I read that sentence twice. My mother said it was not technically a lie. I told her that if someone was fired, describing it as voluntarily leaving was absolutely misleading. She said employers expected people to present themselves positively. I told her that was not the same thing. Then she said something that stayed with me. She said my brother had already suffered enough and that I was choosing to make his life harder. I asked whether she had ever told him that consequences were part of being an adult. She looked at me like I had betrayed her. She picked up the folder. She said she was disappointed in me. Then she left. I stood in my kitchen for several minutes after the door closed. I felt guilty. That surprised me. I knew I was right about the job, but being right did not make the situation feel good. My brother was still my brother. My mother was still my mother. There was no satisfaction in watching someone struggle. I just did not believe that helping someone meant allowing them to build their future on another person's deception. That night, I started documenting everything. Not because I planned to sue anyone, not because I wanted revenge. I simply realized that the situation had become serious enough that I needed a record. I saved the messages from my brother. I saved the emails. I wrote down dates and what had happened while I still remembered them clearly. I kept the folder my mother had left behind. I also reviewed my employment paperwork. My offer letter clearly stated that my employment was based on my qualifications and the company's hiring process. There was nothing about my brother. There was nothing unusual. That should have been the end of it. It was not. The next week, my manager asked to meet with me privately. She closed the office door. She told me that someone had contacted the company asking whether my position was available. My heart started beating faster. I asked who. She said the person had not given a clear name. She also said the caller had implied that my family had connections to the company. My manager asked whether I knew anything about it. I told her the truth. I explained that my brother had applied before me. I explained that he had been rejected. I explained that my mother wanted me to resign so he could take my position. I did not exaggerate. I did not accuse my brother of criminal behavior. I did not tell my manager what I thought he had done at his previous company. I simply described what I knew firsthand. My manager listened. Then she told me that my position was not transferable from one person to another. She said there was no situation in which I would be asked to resign so another candidate could take my place. She also told me that if anyone contacted the company about my employment again, I should forward anything I received directly to her. I left that meeting feeling strangely relieved. For the first time since this started, someone outside my family had heard the entire story and had not told me I was selfish. A few days later, my brother sent me another message. He said I had embarrassed him. I asked how. He said his potential employer had asked why he had left his previous company. I had no idea which company he meant. He said my mother had told him I would handle the situation. That sentence bothered me. I had never agreed to handle anything. I asked him whether he had submitted the resume from the folder. He said yes. I asked whether he had personally signed it. He said yes. I told him that if he had submitted false employment information, that was his responsibility. He stopped responding. 2 weeks passed. Things at work returned to normal. I started settling into the position. I learned the software. I handled my first major account independently. My manager gave me positive feedback. I even started looking at the company's retirement plan because I wanted to increase my contribution once I knew exactly what my monthly budget looked like. For the first time in months, I felt financially stable again. Then Thanksgiving came. My family had always treated Thanksgiving as mandatory. Nobody said it was mandatory, but everyone understood that not showing up created an argument. I almost skipped it. My aunt called me beforehand and told me she hoped I would come. She said things had gotten out of hand and that she thought everyone needed to talk. I agreed. I wish I had not. The dinner started normally. There was turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls, and the same casserole my mother made every year. People talked about football, work, and grocery prices. Nobody mentioned my job for the first hour. Then my mother brought it up. She told everyone that my brother had lost an opportunity because I refused to help him. I did not interrupt. I let her finish. Then my aunt asked what exactly I had been expected to do. My mother explained that I could have resigned and helped my brother start over. My uncle asked whether my brother had actually been offered my position. My mother said the company had been interested in him. I asked whether that was true. She said yes. I asked whether he had been offered the job. She said that was not the point. I asked again. She said no. That was the first time the room became quiet. My brother looked down at his plate. My mother started explaining that the circumstances would have been different if I had stepped aside. My uncle asked whether my brother had actually applied for the job. My brother said yes. Then my aunt asked whether he had been rejected. He said yes. Someone asked why. My brother said the company had concerns about his previous employment. I did not say anything. I did not need to. My mother tried to redirect the conversation toward family responsibility. My uncle asked whether my brother had been fired. My brother said yes. That was the moment everything changed. Several people at the table looked at me. I felt uncomfortable because I did not want to be the person exposing him during Thanksgiving dinner. But I also realized that I had not exposed him. He had answered a question. I told everyone that I had never known the full story until recently. I explained that I had been told I should quit my new job so my brother could take it. I explained that I had refused. I did not describe the details of his previous job because those were his private matters. My mother became angry and said I was making her look bad. I told her I was not trying to make anyone look bad. I was explaining why I had refused to resign. My brother left the table. The dinner ended early. I drove home feeling sick. I kept thinking that maybe I should have stayed quiet. Maybe I should have allowed my family to believe whatever they wanted. Maybe I had made everything worse. The next morning, my aunt called. She said she was sorry. She told me she had believed my mother because my mother had sounded certain. That sentence made me think about how often certainty gets mistaken for truth. My mother had never needed evidence because she spoke as though the outcome was already decided. My aunt also told me something else. She said my brother had admitted to her that he had given another employee his login credentials at his old job. He claimed he had not known that employee was changing customer records. That did not make the decision by his employer unreasonable, but it made the situation more complicated than the simple story that he had been unfairly fired. My brother had made a serious mistake. He had not necessarily intended everything that happened afterward, but he had made the mistake that mattered. Over the next few months, the family divided into different camps. Some relatives stopped discussing it. Some quietly supported me. My mother became distant. My brother rarely contacted me. I was surprised by how much I missed him. Even after everything, he was still the person I had shared a bedroom with during childhood vacations. He was still the kid who used to sit beside me on long car rides. He was still my brother. I did not want him destroyed. I wanted him to take responsibility. There is a difference. In January, I received a letter from my company's Human Resources department. For a moment, I panicked. I thought maybe someone had made another complaint. Instead, the letter informed me that the company had completed a review of the earlier inquiry involving my family. They had found no issue with my hiring. They had also documented that an outside person had attempted to influence the hiring process after my employment began. I was not given many details because some of the information was confidential. But I learned that my mother had contacted someone at the company. She had apparently claimed that my position had been intended for my brother. She had asked whether I could be replaced. The person she contacted had forwarded the communication to HR. That was how my manager had learned about it. My mother had not realized that she was creating a paper trail. That was probably the biggest lesson I learned from the entire situation. People often think evidence means secret recordings or dramatic documents. Most of the time, evidence is much more boring. It is an email, a timestamp, a bank statement, a signed form, a voicemail, a text message, a calendar entry, a normal administrative record that nobody expects to matter until suddenly it does. I had not planned to build a case against my family. I had simply started saving things because I realized I was being pressured to do something serious. That record protected me. Situation eventually became more serious for my brother. His former employer had apparently continued reviewing the records involved in his termination. I learned this through my brother, not through any official document. He told me that the company had sent him a letter requesting information. He was worried they might take legal action. I told him to get an attorney if he thought he needed one. He asked whether I would help him pay for one. I told him I could not. He became angry. Then he apologized. That was unusual for him. He said he had spent years assuming I would always fix things. I told him I had probably helped create that expectation by fixing things too often. That was the most honest conversation we had ever had. I told him that I was not going to abandon him, but I was also not going to lie for him. He said he understood. I hoped he did. For a while, our relationship improved. He found temporary work. It was not glamorous. It paid less than his previous job, but he showed up every day. He started paying down his credit cards. He moved into a smaller apartment. He stopped asking me for money. Those changes mattered more to me than whether he ever apologized perfectly. My mother took longer. She believed that I had turned the entire family against her. I told her that nobody had needed my help to make their own decisions. She said I should have protected my brother. I told her I had protected him from consequences for years. That was not protection anymore. That was postponement. We did not speak for several months. Then my father called me. He had been quiet throughout everything. He told me he had been embarrassed by how the family handled the situation. He also admitted that he had known my mother was helping my brother with the job applications. He said he had not known she intended to pressure me into resigning. I asked why he had not said anything earlier. He said he did not want to get involved. I understood that more than I wanted to. Avoiding conflict can feel neutral when it is happening. Later, you realize that staying silent can still support the person causing the problem. My father apologized. I appreciated it. But I also told him that I did not want another family meeting. I wanted everyone to handle their own relationships individually. That became the pattern afterward. There was no dramatic reconciliation. There was no huge speech. People simply started behaving differently. My mother eventually sent me a letter. She said she regretted how she handled things. She said she had been afraid my brother would never recover professionally. She said she believed I was strong enough to start over while he was not. I believed she meant it. I also believed that her reasoning had been unfair. I wrote back. I told her I loved her. I told her I was willing to rebuild our relationship. But I said I would not accept being treated as the family member whose future could be sacrificed whenever someone else needed help. She did not respond immediately. Several weeks later, she called. We talked for almost an hour. It was not perfect. There were moments when she became defensive. There were moments when I did too. But for the first time, I felt like we were actually talking about what had happened instead of arguing over who was the bad person. She admitted that she had always seen me as the responsible one. She said she had convinced herself that because I could handle things, I should handle them. I told her that being responsible did not mean being endlessly available for sacrifice. She cried. I did too. That conversation did not erase anything, but it changed something. My brother and I slowly became closer again. We started meeting for lunch once every few weeks. We avoided talking about our mother at first. Eventually, we talked about everything. He admitted that when my mother told him I had his job, he believed her. He had convinced himself that I had somehow gotten the opportunity that should have been his. He said it was easier to be angry at me than to admit that his own choices had contributed to his situation. I understood that. I did not excuse it, but I understood it. He also told me something I had never known. When he had first applied to my company, the recruiter had asked him about his previous employment. He had tried to explain the firing without giving the full story. The recruiter had ended the process. When he found out I had been hired later, he told our mother that I had taken his chance. My mother had believed him. From there, the story grew. By the time it reached the rest of the family, it had become a completely different version of events. In that version, I had somehow taken an opportunity that belonged to my brother. The actual version was much less dramatic. Two adults applied for jobs. One of them had a complicated employment history. The other one got hired. The first person's family decided the second person should give up the job. That was it. No conspiracy, no stolen position, no secret promise. Just years of favoritism colliding with adulthood. Looking back, I can see warning signs I ignored. I should have stopped lending my brother money without clear repayment terms. I should have stopped allowing my mother to speak for me. I should have asked questions earlier when relatives repeated things I did not recognize. I should have understood that avoiding uncomfortable conversations was not necessarily kindness. Most importantly, I should have recognized that my family's definition of helping had become distorted. Helping someone apply for a job is helping. Driving someone to an interview is helping. Reviewing a resume is helping. Giving someone money when you can afford it is helping. Giving up your livelihood because someone else made mistakes is not automatically helping. Sometimes it is simply transferring the consequences from one person to another. My job continued to go well. I received a promotion about a year after I started. I increased my retirement contributions. I paid down some of my credit card balance from the period when I had been unemployed. I finally replaced the tires on my car instead of continuing to tell myself they could last another few months. I started building a larger emergency fund. Those things may sound boring. Honestly, they were some of the most satisfying parts of the whole experience. For months, my family had made my job feel like something temporary that could be taken away. Eventually, I stopped seeing it that way. It was my career. It was my income. It was the result of my own work. I had every right to protect it. My brother eventually found a permanent job. It was with a smaller company. The salary was lower than what he had wanted, but he stayed there. He told me that the first time he received a full paycheck from that job, he felt proud. I told him I was proud of him too, not because he had finally found a better job, because he had stayed with something long enough to rebuild trust. We are not the kind of brothers who suddenly became best friends. We still disagree. We still have different personalities. Sometimes we go months without seeing each other. But now when he needs help, he asks instead of assuming. And when I say no, he accepts it. That is probably the biggest change. My mother also changed, although more slowly. She still occasionally tries to solve problems that nobody asked her to solve. That part of her personality probably will never disappear. But she no longer tells me what I have to sacrifice for someone else. At least not without knowing she will get a firm no. The strange thing is that I do not think my mother ever saw herself as manipulative. I do not think my brother saw himself as entitled. I do not think my father saw himself as enabling anyone. They all had explanations that made sense from inside their own heads. My mother thought she was protecting her son. My brother thought he had been treated unfairly. My father thought staying out of the conflict was the safest choice. I thought keeping quiet would prevent arguments. Every person was acting from a belief that made the situation seem reasonable to them. The problem was that the combined result was unreasonable. I was expected to give up my job. Nobody had asked whether I could afford it. Nobody had asked what unemployment had done to me emotionally. Nobody had asked how long it might take me to find another job. Nobody had considered what would happen to my mortgage, health insurance, retirement contributions, or basic expenses. They had simply assumed I would figure it out. That assumption was probably the part that hurt the most. I had spent years being proud that I was responsible. Then I realized that my family had turned that responsibility into an obligation. Being the reliable person can become dangerous when everyone else starts treating reliability as unlimited capacity. The final piece of the story happened almost 2 years after that first phone call. My brother invited me to his apartment for dinner. He had cooked. He was terrible at cooking when we were younger, so I expected something basic. Instead, he made a decent chicken dinner, opened a bottle of sparkling water, and showed me a folder. It was a folder containing his old employment paperwork. He said he had finally accepted that he needed to keep records of his own life instead of depending on our mother to keep track of everything. He had organized his employment records, tax documents, insurance paperwork, and financial statements. He said he had started doing it because of what happened with me. That made me laugh. He said he was serious. He told me that losing his job had been humiliating. He said having our mother try to fix it had made him feel better for a while. But eventually he realized that every time someone rescued him, he became more afraid of handling things himself. He said he had blamed me because I was the easiest person to blame. I told him I had blamed myself for allowing everyone to treat me that way. He told me I did not need to do that. We sat there for a while without saying much. There was no dramatic emotional moment. It was just two brothers sitting at a small kitchen table eating chicken and talking about how strange our family had become. Before I left, he gave me back the money he had borrowed years earlier for the car payment. It was not much. He had included a little extra. I told him he did not have to do that. He said he knew. That was why he wanted to. I accepted it, not because I needed the money, because I understood what it meant to him. On the drive home, I thought about that Tuesday night when my mother first told me to quit. At the time, I thought the important part was my refusal. Looking back, it was not. The important part was that I finally stopped assuming other people's emergencies automatically became my responsibility. I also realized that my sarcastic response about my brother explaining why he lost his job had not actually been the thing that protected me. The protection came afterward. I stayed calm. I kept records. I refused to lie. I asked questions instead of making accusations. I let my employer handle employment issues through proper channels. I did not threaten anyone. I did not post family business online. I did not call my brother's former employer. I did not try to ruin his career. I simply refused to give up mine. That distinction matters to me now. There was a period when I thought winning meant proving that my mother was wrong. It did not. Winning was getting up every morning and going to work without wondering whether someone in my family was going to take it away. Winning was paying my mortgage on time. Winning was rebuilding my savings. Winning was being able to talk to my brother without feeling responsible for his decisions. Winning was being able to tell my mother no without spending the rest of the day feeling guilty. And maybe most importantly, winning was realizing that I could love people without surrendering control of my own life. I still think about what might have happened if I had listened. I would have resigned. My brother would have applied again. Someone at the company might have reconsidered him. Maybe he would have been hired. Maybe he would not. Either way, I would have been unemployed because my family believed his need was greater than mine. And if the company later discovered the truth about his employment history, the consequences would have landed on him. But I would still have been the person without a job. That is what finally made the whole thing clear to me. My mother had not found a solution to my brother's problem. She had found a way to move the problem onto me. Once I saw that, I could not unsee it. I do not hate my mother. I do not hate my brother. I do not even think my family is uniquely terrible. I think a lot of families develop patterns that nobody notices until those patterns collide with something important. For years, I was the responsible son. My brother was the one who needed help. My mother was the one who fixed things. My father stayed out of the way. It worked until the thing my brother needed was something I could not give him without hurting myself. That was where the old system finally broke. And honestly, I am glad it did, because if my mother had never asked me to quit, I might have continued living under the same assumptions for another 20 years. I might have kept lending money. I might have kept apologizing for setting boundaries. I might have kept thinking that being a good son meant making my own life smaller whenever someone else was struggling. Instead, I learned something I wish I had understood much earlier. You can be compassionate without being compliant. You can forgive someone without fixing their consequences. You can love your family without handing them your future. And sometimes the strongest response is not exposing someone, humiliating them, or getting revenge. Sometimes it is simply staying calm, telling the truth, and refusing to move. That is what I did. My brother eventually rebuilt his career. My mother eventually understood that I was not going to sacrifice my stability to prove that I loved my family. And I kept the job I had worked so hard to get. A job that, in the end, turned out to be more than just a paycheck. It was the first thing in my adult life that I protected because it was mine. And for once, nobody else got to decide that I should give it away.